In the UAE, the price of silver went up 34% in one day. In the West, the same metal sells for half that much, the exact same ounce. There are two very different worlds. One market screams 127, while another says $72. It's not a bug. This won't be temporary. Real-time cracks in a world system can be heard here. China made sure there was no going back on January 1st, 2026. What does it mean when the biggest refiner in the world says the West can't get any more silver? You will no longer believe what you thought you knew about markets after reading this. Hey there, this is Boring Currency. Now, before we go any further, you should stay tuned to this station if you've been watching economic patterns for a long time and remember when markets made sense and setting prices meant something. We're not after news stories here. We read the signs before they turn into disasters. Please do us both a favor. Press that button to join. You can think of it as saving the link to the one source that will not lose your decades of experience with noise at the surface level. Also, tell us where you are right now that you are watching this. Write down your country below, because everywhere silver is going through the same thing, but some people still can't see it. In the United Arab Emirates, silver did something that shouldn't have been possible in a world market that is linked together. In 24 hours, the price went up 34%, from $95 an ounce to $127.45 an ounce. While this was going on, traders in New York saw a very different number on their screens, $72.82, the same metal, the same day, two prices that are very different. This wasn't just a short-term glitch that went away in a few minutes. This gap had been there for a long time and was getting bigger. It showed something much worse than just an inefficient market. Many experts thought it was a data error when they first saw the difference. There may have been a mistake in the news from the Dubai markets. It could be a problem with the cash. But as the hours went by and the gap got bigger instead of smaller, a darker truth began to come out. The world market for silver was no longer working as a single structure. It had broken up. The LBMA in London and the COMEX in New York were the world's standard places to find out how much valuable metals were worth for many years. These prices were used to find out how much silver cost anywhere in the world. The price shown on those screens became the standard around the world. People who bought in Tokyo, sold in Mumbai, and refined in Switzerland all used the same number. The main idea behind this method was what made it work. The idea was easy to understand. Someone could buy silver in New York for $72 and sell it in Dubai for $127 if that were possible. Traders would be interested in that arbitrage chance right away. That is, they would buy on the cheap market and sell on the pricey market until the prices came together. This is how markets work in general. This is how the world's trade markets should work. But that part of the machine had broken. The exchange wasn't taking place. There was still a gap. Analysts started to ask the simple question, why? Why weren't traders taking advantage of this huge difference in prices? The answer pointed to something that most people in the market didn't want to see. There wasn't enough real silver in the markets in the West to buy and send to the East. What did the $72 price for books mean? It meant something different from the $127 price in Dubai. One was the cost of a promise on paper. The other one was the price of real metal. When scientists looked at trading data for COMEX, they found a strange trend. Every day, thousands of contracts are sold. There were 5,000 ounces of silver in each deal. But when those contracts ended, almost none of them led to delivery in the real world. Traders rolled them over into new contracts instead. Either that or they paid cash. The metal itself didn't move around much. The COMEX had changed into something other than a way to trade real goods. It had turned into a derivatives market where paper contracts were always being traded while the real silver sat in vaults, mostly unchanged. Or maybe the silver wasn't really in the vaults. This brought up an awkward question that not many people wanted to look into too seriously. If there were paper contracts worth hundreds of millions of ounces of silver, but only a small amount of that metal was available for delivery, what would happen when multiple contract users wanted their silver at the same time? A possible reason was the UAE price rise. In markets where buyers insisted on physical delivery and paper promises weren't acceptable, the price had to go up a lot to get the small amount of stock that was available. The buyers from the Middle East weren't interested in futures contracts. In other words, they wanted bars, coins, and real metal that they could hold and check. They were ready to pay 75% more than the Western standard to get it. This led to a logical problem with the whole system of prices. Which price was real? Was silver really worth $72 like the COMEX said it was, or was it really worth $127 like Dubai showed? Most of the time, people say that prices are set by how supply and demand meet in the market. But what happens when two places that sell the same thing find that it is worth very different amounts? What takes place if the gap doesn't close? What happens when the system that's meant to help find prices makes prices harder to find? A new word was used by financial analysts who were looking into the issue. Their name for it stopped being price discovery. It was called price fabrication at first. The COMEX didn't find out how much silver was worth. In truth, the number it was making up had less and less to do with reality, and it was getting harder to keep up that lie. Because there was another force across the Pacific that was about to make things much worse. China was getting ready to use its power over the world's silver supply as a weapon. The date was already set. The 1st of January 2026. The message came in quietly. There was no exciting news conference. There was no emergency market alert. There was only a formal announcement on a Beijing government website. The People's Republic of China would put strict limits on the sale of silver starting January 1st, 2026. Most experts in the West quickly skimmed over it. Another news on rules from China, nothing strange. But a small group of experts in commodities read the small print and got sick to their guts. This plan had been seen before. China had done something similar with rare earth elements 15 years before, those strange metals that no one cared about, until all of a sudden every tech company in the world needed them badly. China was in charge of making 90% of the rare earths. Then one day they stopped exporting as much. Prices went through the roof. Supply chains broke down. Businesses went crazy. They were now using the same plan on silver. Things were even more important this time. China wasn't the world's biggest silver miner. Mexico was the rightful owner of that title. But digging wasn't the whole story. The metal that comes out of the ground can't be used right away. It needs to be improved, cleaned, and turned into standard bars that meet the standards of the business. It also had more than 75% of the world's silver refining ability. This was where things got backed up. Mexico, Peru, Australia, and Chile, which are all big silver producers, all sent their raw ore to Chinese factories. It got dirty on the metal, it was clean. Then it went to places all over the world. Because it was good for business, the system had worked well for decades. China had spent billions of dollars improving its facilities. They had the right tools. They knew what they were doing. They had the power. They chose to ship raw materials to China instead of building their own factories because it was cheaper, but economy had made people reliant on it. And dependence had made people weak. Even after the export limits were put in place, the flow of polished silver around the world didn't stop. China was way too smart for that. An outright embargo would cause a reaction around the world right away. They did something more subtle instead. They set up a license system. For export licenses, the government had to say yes. The times for approval became uncertain. The amounts got smaller. Priorities moved toward meeting needs at home. The silver that used to flow west naturally would only flow when Beijing thought it was in their best interest to do so. And Beijing decided more and more that it didn't. First, the effect was seen in store stock. The big gold shops online were the first to notice it. Their warehouse managers began sending important messages right away. Shipments that usually came once a week were late. Orders made with wholesalers were not met. Suppliers stopped picking up the phone. After 3 weeks, the shelves started to empty. First, the bigger bars went away. No more 100-ounce bars. We are out of kilo bars. 10-ounce bars are back-ordered for a long time. People who bought things in stores were used to clicking buy now and getting their packages within a few days. Suddenly, they saw a different message on their computers. Not available anymore. Not available right now. Longer waiting times. Then the smaller sellers began to put up signs. A medium-sized store with loyal customers called Monument Metals showed that almost all of their silver products were sold out. Similar shortfalls were reported by Texas Precious Metals. Delivery times at SD Bullion went from 1 week to 6 weeks, then 8 weeks, and now you have to call to see if they have any left. The strange part was this, though. Metal items stopped being sold in stores and warehouses, but the COMEX showed something completely different. The trade data showed that there was a lot of silver. Every day, thousands of contracts changed hands. Interest from the public stayed high. The screens showed that the availability was good. Everything seemed fine. All of it was still linked to metal, but not in any way. A researcher chose to do an easy experiment to see if this disconnect was real. She called 5 big gold sellers. She asked for a price quote on 1,000 ounces of real silver, standard amount in business. Nothing strange. The first buyer said it would cost $93 an ounce, $20 extra on top of the COMEX, but it would take 12 weeks to deliver. The second buyer gave a price of $98, 16 weeks to deliver. The third dealer said that they could not fill the order at any cost. It was the fourth buyer who didn't answer the phone. The fifth buyer said the price was $106 an ounce if she agreed to a 20-week delivery window and paid for it up front. After that, she called her dealer and asked for 200 COMEX silver contracts, 1 million ounces worth. At $70 an ounce, the order was made right away. On paper, she now had 1,000 ounces of silver. But could she give birth? She asked for a physical payment. The trader was uncertain. The phone went silent for a long time. Then the reason came out. Technically, delivery could have happened in person, but more papers had to be filled out, extra charges. Some extra time. Most clients would rather get paid in cash. Not hard at all, would it? She insisted on giving birth in person. One more stop. The center would be the place for the broker to check. Someone would call her again. No one called back. After 3 days, she got a text. Her request for delivery had been marked to be looked at again. Because the market was acting strangely, actual settlements were being handled one at a time. The current working time is unknown. She had just learned something that the buyers in the UAE already knew. Silver on paper and silver in real life had become two very different things. One lived in an infinite number of forms on computer screens. The other one was hardly there at all. The space between them was getting bigger every day. It was getting hard to avoid the question that no one wanted to ask out loud. If China was in charge of refining, China was limiting exports, and Western stocks were running low, how long could the paper price dream last? A skilled metals trader was sitting in his Chicago office and looking at 2 screens. Trade in silver on the COMEX was $72 on the left screen. On the right screen of his phone, text messages from people in 7 different countries can be seen. Japan, willing to pay $130, needs 500 kilograms right away. $125 cash in Singapore, any amount available. China, plus $55 on the spot, just the physical. His business had been dealing in rare metals for 32 years. He had seen market changes happen before, moments when prices in different parts of the country were different because of changes in the currency or short-term supply problems. It never took more than hours or minutes for those gaps to close. This was different. This gap had been getting bigger for weeks, and he couldn't figure out why from what he knew about markets. He chose to do a test. He called the COMEX clearing desk and asked a straightforward question. How long will it be before the metal gets to my chosen vault if I take delivery on 5 contracts right now? The woman on the other line stopped talking. He heard people typing on the keyboard. Type some more. Then, sir, could you please hold? It's been 8 minutes. There was a different voice, a male, older, and careful voice. We're getting more delivery calls than usual. The standard schedule is getting longer. What did it extend to? We'll let you know when exactly we need to meet. One more stop. It could be a few weeks. We'll let you know via email. He put the phone down. It took several weeks to bring metal that was said to have been waiting in a vault. Metal that the exchange said was easy to find in large amounts. He opened his software for analysis and looked up delivery statistics from the past. There was no denying the trend. COMEX handled about 500,000 ounces of silver for physical delivery every month, but there was more than 900 million ounces of open interest. That meant there were 1,800 ounces of paper claims for every ounce of real silver that changed hands. He leaned back in his chair. It wasn't a market. It was a trick. It was getting harder to keep up the trick. Someone working as a legal analyst in London, England, was finding something just as scary. She was told to look over the LBMA locker reporting data, standard work for safety, usually dull, but this month the numbers didn't add up. LBMA's published records say that their vaults held about 35,000 tons of silver. That's about 1 billion ounces, enough to back up what the paper says. Not really, but she thought the footnotes were strange. A big chunk of that silver was marked as allocated, already owned by certain groups, not available for sale to the general market. After taking out the metal that had been given out, the amount of metal that was still available dropped to about 200 million ounces. Still important. After that, she compared that to open bets and derivatives on other global exchanges. According to the paper, it added up to almost 4 billion ounces. It told her something that couldn't be true. There were 20 ounces of paper promises for every ounce of silver that could be delivered. 3 times she double-checked her numbers, the same result. She carefully crafted an email and sent it to her boss. Within an hour, the answer came back. It is known about these differences. The method is based on the idea that most contracts are settled with cash instead of delivery. This is true for all product markets. Normal thing to do. The line kept going through her mind. What they called standard practice looked exactly the same as what the government calls fractional reserve in the banking world. Everything was fine with the system until everyone needed metal at the same time. Then it would fall apart right away. 2008 came to mind, the financial disaster that almost brought down the world's banks. In that disaster, banks made too many promises that they couldn't keep. They gave out loans for money they didn't have. The house of cards fell when everyone tried to do it at the same time. Did the same thing happen on the silver market? At the same time, an economics professor was making a statistical model in a study office at a large university. Specifically, he was interested in how price reduction works. According to theory, it was impossible to keep the prices of goods intentionally low for a long time. In the end, market forces always won, but his research showed that wasn't true. He saw that there was a pattern. When the price of silver started to rise quickly, there were huge orders to sell on the futures market, not going slowly, not making money from long bets, huge concentrated dumps that were higher than what buyers wanted. These orders didn't act like normal people in the market. Like everyone else, sellers tried to get the best price. They slowly spread out their big positions so as not to make the market go against them. The opposite of what these orders said. They looked like they were made to bring down the price. And they showed up at a strange time, usually during times when there wasn't a lot of trading going on. Asian evening times, pre-market in Europe, when a big order to sell would have the most effect on the price. He figured out how likely it was that this trend would happen on its own. It was such a small number that it was almost equal to zero. Someone was deliberately keeping the price of silver low. Who was the question? Plus, why is it important? Perhaps the answer can be found in an old pocketbook. A thing called the London Gold Pool was run by central banks from 1961 to 1968. 8 countries worked together to keep the price of gold low. To do this, they sold gold from their stores whenever the price on the market got too high. It worked for 7 years. They were able to keep the price of gold at $35 an ounce. But in 1968, there was more desire than they could meet. The pool broke down. Gold went up right away. It had grown by more than 20 times in just a few years. The teacher saw similarities, not the same metal, different time, the same process. In 1968, central banks did have real gold to sell, which made the difference. In 2026, the person or people who were keeping silver prices low didn't seem to have any silver. Laws were only written on paper. Paper gets burned. In Dubai, a commodity analyst wrote a study that was never made public. A big bank that hired him killed it before it got to anyone else. They said it was too upsetting. It's too uncertain. But he had written down something very interesting. He knew about every big drop in the price of silver over the last 18 months. Then he compared those drops to trade data from the COMEX. 73% of the time, the price drops were started by a single company. The same way of trade, the same amount of food, at the same time. He ran into a wall when he tried to figure out who was behind the trades. Multiple purposely hidden middleman accounts were used to place the orders, but the signature used for trade was the same. One thing, or maybe a group that works together. With what seemed like an infinite ability to sell silver, which they probably didn't have. At the end of his report, there was one sentence that his boss wouldn't let him print. The COMEX silver price doesn't show how the market is doing. It shows massive market trickery that will eventually cause the whole system to fail. No one saw how close that failure really was. A supply chain manager for a big company that makes solar panels got an email that really scared her. Subject line, purchase of silver. Important status report. Their main provider, who they had worked with for 8 years, was ending their deal. Not talking again. Not making prices go up. This is ending. The supplier said they could not promise shipping any longer no matter what. Their Chinese refining partners were no longer taking orders from people outside of China. Promises made in the past would be kept. Afterwards, nothing. She called their alternative supplier right away. The same thing. Third provider, the same thing. In just 48 hours, she called every silver provider in their network, 17 businesses in all. 15 said they were not able to assist. 2 of them said they might be able to offer a small amount at 3 times the price of the previous deal. Not sure when the delivery will happen. You need to pay 90 days in advance. She did the math. Each solar panel would cost $43 more to make if the price of silver tripled. They made $38 per unit in profit. The math was easy and terrible. They were no longer able to make money making solar cells. They were not the only ones. Manufacturers in the electronics business were all coming to the same conclusion. They had to use silver in all of their goods. It was very important. The best way for electricity to flow, the best material for moving heat. For most uses, there was no good replacement available. It was needed for circuit boards. Switches had to have it. Those in touch needed it. Batteries had to have it. Without silver, it would not be possible to make current electronics, but they couldn't get the silver, or rather, it was available at prices that made it too expensive to make. Another way a New York hedge fund boss felt about the crisis was very different. He saw an opening. He learned about the silver market for 6 months. The information told him that something very strange was about to happen. He figured that about 1 billion ounces of silver were needed each year by industries around the world. At the same time, only 850 million ounces were made in mines. That meant that every year there was a deficit of 150 million ounces. There would not be enough silver to meet demand after that. Price would have to play a role in the market. The market needs to be balanced. So how high would prices have to go before they do? His model said it would be between $300 and $500 an ounce. Could be higher. He put his money in the right place. Buying silver in real life, mining business stock, call options on silver futures that are not in the money. He was betting everything on the price going through the roof. He knew there was a risk, though. If the prices on the paper market kept being manipulated and not based on reality, his positions could suffer for years before they were finally vindicated. It was all about timing. In Beijing, policy experts were keeping a clinically detached eye on how the Western markets were reacting. The limits on exports were doing exactly what they were meant to do: disruption without a direct fight, pressure on the economy without using force. There was no better way to handle strategic resources than this. For their own industrial growth, China needs huge amounts of silver, EVs or electric cars, solar power system, networks for 5G, building a smart city. Why send an important resource to a possible rival when demand at home was growing faster? Let the West handle their own supply chains. They should be able to pay more for any scraps that were still available on global markets. Let them know how much being dependent really costs. A top economist at a European central bank was writing a note that needed to be kept secret. Who is the target audience? Finance leaders and people in charge of monetary policy all over the EU. Subject: unstable market for precious metals, systemic evaluation of risk. She came to a harsh decision. The silver market failure was a sign of bigger problems to come in the commodity markets. If silver paper markets could become so removed from reality, it could happen with other important materials too: copper, platinum, palladium. 4. Lithium, rare earths. The whole system for setting prices for commodities that supported global trade was based on the idea that paper contracts were backed by things that could be delivered. That idea was starting to fall apart. If it totally broke, the effects would be felt throughout the whole financial system. People would lose faith in futures markets. It would no longer be possible to hedge. It would be impossible to find prices. There would be a lot of chaos in industrial planning. She suggested taking action right away. Check the physical stock, check what's in the box, stop people from selling metal futures naked, demand proof of physical support for stances that are derivatives. People shared and talked about her letter, and then it was quietly filed away. There wasn't enough political will to change the way markets were set up. Not yet, at least not until the problem was too big to ignore. Silver prices had jumped to 127 in the UAE, but they were now at 134. In Japan, premiums were $60 more than what was thought to be the world average. People were paying $112 in Kuwait, 99 won in South Korea. The COMEX still had $72 on them. A visualization was made by an independent expert. Silver prices are shown on a world map by color coding each area. For the most money, choose deep red, dark blue for the lowest. The map looked like a picture of market stress in the form of heat. In Asia and the Middle East, it was red. There is blue in North America and Europe. There was a clear line between them. east of the point where polishing stops. Costs are high, lack of quantity, only metal itself. West of where the road narrows, cheap prices, a lot of paper, lack of resources, two places, one metal, realities that are very different. The expert added a possible timeline. She thought that the paper market could keep its unfair prices for about 6 more months based on current consumption rates and falling supplies. After that, there would be such a lack of real goods that industrial users would have to bid against each other directly. That's when you would find the price again. Not kindly, someone asked a rare metals dealer who had seen 4 decades of market cycles to give his opinion. He took a break, kept his words in mind. I know what a dislocation looks like. There were short periods of chaos, and then things went back to normal. That's not this. This is a break in the structure. There is no longer a market that existed 50 years ago. We're moving on to something else. Also, changes are never easy. Someone asked him what price he thought silver would reach in the end. He laughed. Not the right question. It's not important to know how much silver will cost. The question is how much dollars will be worth after the change. Because we're learning right now that vows written on paper are different from real life. It will change more than just the silver market because of what they found. When the books closed that day, silver was worth 72.19. It went up 11 cents. The screen showed a good amount of noise. Normal business dealings, it looked like everything was okay. But in Asia, stores were getting ready to load the last bars onto trucks. In factories all over China, export permits were being turned down. CFOs were figuring out how long they could keep making things in boardrooms across the electronics business. In London and New York, inventory managers were seeing their stock amounts drop month after month in vaults. The time was running out. The gap was getting bigger. The time for judgment was coming up. And when it got there, the 70-teller dream would go away like morning fog in the hot sun. The fact that physical scarcity always wins would be left. In the end, finally would come in a few months or weeks, or maybe it had already come. That was the only question left, and most people still hadn't noticed.